can I just get you to introduce yourself for the mob out there?
I am, by way of my legal fiction and evidenced by my birth certificate, Dennis Bruce Walker. That is my legal fiction in the societal context that has been thrust upon us by the invader and occupier. My given names are Bejam, Kunmunara, Jalo, Noonuccal, Kabool, son of Ujuru of the tribe Noonuccal, custodian of the land Minjerribah. I come from Moongalba via Gumpi, Minjerribah, Quandamooka, 4183. That is my real name, but my legal fiction name is Dennis Bruce Walker.
What I wanted to ask you, what is sovereignty?
What is sovereignty at international law? You must have a people, a government, and a territory. We have that because we know who we are and where we go to in terms of our territory. And our territories tell us who we are.
Yep.
I am from Minjerribah, Stradbroke Island. Quandamooka, Moreton Bay. I am Bejam, Kunmunara, Jalo, Noonuccal, Kabool, son of Ujuru of the tribe Noonuccal, custodian of the land Minjerribah. And her legal fiction was Kathleen Jean Mary Rusker, née Walker, when she got married. And she wrote her early works under Kath Walker.
Yep. What could you say to our mob out there in regards to the Recognised campaign and recognition onto the Constitution? Can you explain what concerns that you would have in regards to us being recognised on the Constitution?
Well, I tend to agree with Marcy Langton. And she realises, because she's a very clever lady, she's a professor. And she realises that in terms of constitutional change, the Constitution of Australia comes under Section 9 of the Australia Act in the British Parliament. So, in terms of making a change, it is fraught with difficulties. In terms of blackfella being recognised by such a constitution, fraught with all the imperfections that an invading colonial society manifests, including theft, murder and genocide, then you're dealing with a pretty weird animal in terms of the Australian Constitution. And it flies in the face of existing legislations of the Pacific Islanders Protection Acts of 1872, 1875 and the amendments of 1883. And these legislatures defined clearly that it was this place that they were talking about, and that in fact that legislature, if I might read it out, if someone could get it for me, it says quite clearly in those legislatures that that's the place we're talking about, that the Queen at the time, Victoria, had no intention of placing her sovereignty or domain here, and it was the sovereignty and domain of the various tribes. and their elders and chiefs and rulers thereof. And this legislation has been buried up until about 7 years ago, when I understand Mark McMurtry went into the bowels of the Victorian Parliament records and archives and dug out the King's Seal, which relates to the South Australians' sovereignty and domain over their own country, as emphasised in that letter patent from King William IV, that has also been buried, and Mark McMurtry found that, as well as the Pacific Islanders Protection Acts of 1872, 75 and 83. And Michael Anderson found the 83 legislatures in the UK Parliament. He went over to the UK Parliament and dug down there, and the most important being that of the 83 legislature, which says quite clearly, 7, saving of rights of tribes. Nothing herein or in any such order in council contained shall extend or be construed to extend to invest Her Majesty, her heirs and successors, which makes it Crown law now, with any claim or title whatsoever to dominion or sovereignty over any such islands or places as aforesaid, or to derogate from the rights of the tribes or people inhabiting such islands or places, or of chiefs or rulers thereof to such sovereignty or dominion, and a copy of every such order in council shall be laid before each House of Parliament within 30 days after the issue thereof, unless Parliament shall not then be in session, in which case a copy shall be laid before each House of Parliament within 30 days after the commencement of the next ensuing session. What I'm saying is these legislatures have obviously been buried and hidden from us, as well as the letters patent of King William IV guaranteeing sovereignty of the South Australian blackfellas, sovereign tribal Aborigine peoples. And there has been some evil done in high places. Yes.
So, you've been to the High Court how many times?
5.
5 times.
Last time I went there representing myself.
Yeah.
And I resolved at the time, and it was Mary Golden hearing it, that if Mary Golden was going to fight against me, I was going to say to her that it took you over 200 years to discover us, so I guess I can't expect much from the High Court.
Yep.
And I did that as a deliberate act and said that, and knew she'd go off the deep end and make some very serious mistakes at law, which to this day could be appealed. And if you read the transcripts of that hearing, you will see how it could be repealed. But I didn't bother going on with it. I'm too busy asserting my own sovereignty.
So, what's the process of how you are asserting sovereignty?
What needs to happen at their law is there's a presumption by them that they do have sovereignty and dominion over us. And they do that by way of the law of the sea. Thus you've got townships, citizenships. These are all vessels. The courthouse itself is a vessel where you get your birth certificate. And in terms of that birth certificate, they enslave the population of this country by saying, by way of that birth certificate, you are bound to the statutes of the country, of whatever laws they want to make. So you are subject to those laws by way of your birth certificate. Now, at law, you are the owner of that constructive trust created by your birth certificate. You are the administrator and the executor of that constructive trust. And you can repute their hold over you by statute, by revealing the fact that you know that this is a legal fiction and a constructive trust of which you are the administrator and executor, and you can forbid them to use that in any way, shape or form, and if they do, there will be they will be acting unlawfully, and that because they act unlawfully, that then becomes a transaction of a security interest. In my proclamation of sovereignty, I make a point that I will not in any way resist, but I will comply to their instructions, even though they are unlawful, but I do so under protest and duress. So that anything I sign or they make me do is against my free will.
Yep.
And therefore they are liable, given that they are breaking the law, for costs. And in terms of those costs, I have a schedule of fees and a bill of costs after a notice of want of response has been issued, and they will be liable for those costs. I have recently taken out a writ on the Chief Magistrate Lorraine Walker of the Canberra courts here, and along with the Commissioner of the Federal Police, the 3 arresting officers and the prosecutor, in terms of a matter she heard and refused to hear my evidence that they had a want of jurisdiction and should have adjourned the matter sine die, which means for another day, and in the Australian vernacular it is sine die, which means for another day when the sovereignty and dominion matters are settled by way of a treaty, which I have offered to the Governor-General.
Do you have a copy of your proclamation there?
Yes, I'll read it out for you. This is my self-defence notice, and anyone can use this. They just have to change it to their names.
Yep.
I am Bejam, Kunmunara, Jalo, Noonuccal, Kabool, son of Udra of the tribe Noonuccal, custodian of the land in Jeraba, a sovereign tribal Aborigine person. My passport is enclosed. I am the administrator and executor of the Constructive Trust Corporation known as Dennis Bruce Walker, registration number 1946 21515. As the administrator and executor of the Constructive Trust, represented by my birth certificate, which I attach, I am advising you that I do not give you permission to use Dennis Bruce Walker in any manner, and you will be liable for any use of Dennis Bruce Walker by you, for which you do not have my permission. It is my understanding as a sovereign tribal Aborigine person, that I do not stand under your law, and that according to the legislations enclosed, the Acts of Settlement 1701 and the Pacific Islanders Protection Acts 1872, 1875, 1883, you act unlawfully. Any such actions by the Crown to in any way not respect and enforce my sovereignty and dominion is an unlawful act on me and my family, and we will only comply only under protest and duress, for which you will be held liable, as this will become a transaction of a security interest, and that creates a liability. There will be a writ and a schedule of fees resulting in a bill of costs. Any disputation at law with me or my family must lie sine die, or in the vernacular sine die, until these sovereignty and dominion matters are properly settled by way of an informed consent. And I've signed it there, Bejam and Dennis Walker, and that's the stamp my mother had made when she was alive. Uju of the tribe Noonuccal, Custodial of the land in Jalo, and I signed it, Bejam. There.
Yep.
That's my sovereignty seal.
So you've actually given out writs to how many magistrates now, or how many people in the government have you done that to?
Oh, I've done to about 100.
About 100. And you've got a list there?
I have got a list somewhere here.
Yep.
It's, yes.
And so what are the repercussions of handing out these writs?
Well, what I'm saying is they do act unlawfully, and that I can prove it.
Yep.
And there's several matters going on that I'm involved with, some up at Lismore and one down here,
Yep.
On which we've served a couple of magistrates with writs, a couple of prosecutors with writs,
Yep.
The police, etc. I'm saying they have a want of jurisdiction, because what they are not the sovereign owners of this country. They are a de facto and therefore illegitimate by way of the Queen's sovereignty. The Queen's sovereignty says that it is our sovereignty and our domain. Crown law says this is so, and there has been nothing that has been done or said to change that fact. What we're being governed by is a de facto government acting as de jure, that they do have jurisdiction when in fact they don't. The Crown law clearly shows that it is our sovereignty and dominion, only they've hidden them away for a long time, and a lot of magistrates are very confused about the whole matter. But sooner or later, one of those magistrates is going to have to recognise the fact that they are de facto, and that to act in a de jure way, they must treaty in with the sovereign owners of this domain. Until they do, they are de facto and therefore illegitimate government who have no sovereignty or domain over it whatsoever. They are simply a colony of England. The colony of Australia is Section 9 of the Australia Act of the British Parliament. And it's very difficult to change that unless you have all the dominions agreeing, which takes in Canada, New Zealand, a whole heap of Commonwealth countries that come under that Queen's law. And by way of that 1872, 75 and 83 legislations saying her heirs and successors makes it Crown law now. So what they're calling Crown land is not, that's a de facto and illegitimate presumption that we must rebut. Unless you rebut that presumption, the presumption stands at law at every step of the way. When you're dealing with Crown officers, you rebut their presumption of having any sovereignty or dominion over you. Until you do that, the presumption stands. And you do that simply by saying, I am a sovereign tribal Aborigine person, and by law, you have no jurisdiction over them. And that's where the acts come in.
What are the implications of the Australian government being illegitimate? What does that mean in the context of our lives, I guess, and for the movement as well?
Well, it has very serious implications in terms of Australia's standing in the world. Given that they are a de facto government, which is illegitimate because it hasn't got the sovereignty or domain on which they claim, it resides with us, then they have difficulties entering into any treaty or trade arrangements with other countries. So the embassies and other places are meeting and working out this whole sovereignty dominion area, and I hope to be in Alice Springs for Rosalie Monk's and Tortoise Sainsbury looking for the way forward on sovereignty by way of treaty, and I hope to be there. And what I see that should arise out of that national cohesion on sovereignty and domain is that until the Australian government does do treaty on the basis of a controlling interest by way of 51% sovereign tribal Aborigine peoples, 49% for the Australian colony, which is the terms I've offered to the Governor-General some time back, then all trade should stop. That there be an economic embargo on the illegitimate state of Australia, which is a colony and has no jurisdiction to do anything in terms of their sovereignty and their domain, because it's not theirs, it's ours. And until they do treaty and get the de jure they require, then the world should boycott Australia. Economically, trade should stop with Australia until they act lawfully.
And is there anything else you can tell us besides the 49-51 split? What would be in the treaty, and what would be the implications of having the treaty then after, let's say it did happen?
What I've said to the Governor-General is that he needs to understand they went the way of Cain, we went the way of Abel. Now, by way of treaty, I'm saying in order to fulfil God's law, they need to come out of their property law of Cain, which gives the perception of other, so that you can commit genocide, and change from that property law and come into our custodial laws, so we can look after people and country properly by way of our four estates. The four estates of the invader and occupier and genocider is Queen, Parliament, Judiciary, and the media is the fourth estate. Our estates are elders, men's business, women's business, law, initiation, bloodline back to territory, as defined roughly on this Tyndale map. What the Tyndale map can't show is the domains and ranges and the layered titles involved in that process. That's a vague blueprint that blackfella can draw on, and whitefella, but work back into those regional governances where the layered titles are in, and you have policemen in, policemen out. And the policeman's there to look after you and keep the peace, not to enforce you to obey what can only be called a cargo cult established under Admiralty law, and I'm speaking of the so-called Australian government here. It is simply a cargo cult established under Admiralty laws, the law of the sea, in order to make a lot of money at the expense of our sovereignty and domains. They're robbing us blind, locking us up. Our children's incarceration rates are in Brisbane 51%, jumping to 74%. In Northern Territory, 90%. In Western Australia, 90%. In New South Wales, 51%. I think it's about the same in Victoria. I'm not sure about the other two states, Victoria and Tasmania, but there are very high rates of incarceration of our children which deny them their people, their land and their culture. And it's genocidal, and they're genociders. And because they are genociding us, I call on urgent actions be taken to economically boycott the state of Australia or any corporation that operates under its auspices, because it is illegitimate, because it is a de facto, and it has no sovereignty or domain.
What would you say to the fellow on the street who's right at the start of the journey? What advice would you give them, and how would they get into all this at the start?
Listen. It's pretty simple. Listen and learn. That's how blackfellow do it. I don't know how you do it. That's all we do. It's not complicated. The devil's world has made everything very complicated with his property law. Deviates.
Is there any particular people that are doing good work in this area right now who, like, would you refer people to watch their videos or read their work?
Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff out there in terms of the legislatures and the constitutional stuff, which I'll be presenting in evidence in court. But one thing that does spring to mind is Gary Foley on persons of interest that you can easily access on YouTube, which shows how ludicrous they are, were and still are. Only their madness has got a lot bigger because of metadata. Is it? ASIA didn't have things like that back in the day. But you can see what a balls up they make of everything.
What's Gary talking about in that video?
Oh, he's talking about his ASIA file.
Oh, from back in the 70s as well.
Yes, when there were communists and feminists and all those people that were supporting blackfellas. They were trying to find out what foreign influence there was without even taking any notice of what we actually were saying in terms of our sovereignty and our domain. They didn't want to hear that. They still don't want to hear that.
Yeah, and you've been involved for such a long time. What's the difference today than when maybe back in the 70s? Is there much change?
It's got worse. Back in the day, back in 30, 40 years ago, I remember quite clearly when I made public speeches, and I made a lot of them, at demos and then university campuses we used to trot around lecturing. And one of the things that used to bug me to the max was the fact that there was 27% of youth incarcerated back then. It's now jumped up to over 50% in most places and up to 90% in Northern Territory and Western Australia. And it's a crime against humanity. And no one's talking about it. No one says anything about it. And it's a shock and disgrace. And it's genocide, and it's got to stop. And this is the way to stop it. It's our sovereignty and our domain. You've got to rebut their presumption that it is theirs and claim it as yours, and tell them they have a want of jurisdiction and they must sine die the matter until they fix it by way of treaty.
And is there any difference in what's happening in Australia to the rest of the world? Are we in a unique position here for any reason?
Well, blackfellow are unique because we kept the garden as God gave it. I say this is the Garden of Eden. With your plate shifts, it works out just about right. And if you see us as went the way of Abel in the Garden of Eden and kept the garden as God gave it, in terms of Cain, he resides in the land of Nod, east of Eden. That makes it the United States of America, from where we sit. The land of Nod. Biblical. Read your Bible.
I just want to go back to, just for the purposes of this video, ask you a difficult question actually. Like, would you, just for the purposes of clarity, if you're talking to someone on the street who's maybe at the beginning, how would you like introduce the topic of sovereignty in like 1 minute? And second part two, with the way forward in Australia, what's going on? Do you see a separation between like what black people are doing and white people are doing, or do you think it should be together, or should it be separate?
In terms of sovereignty, first,
Yes.
Please show me the document that transfers the sovereignty from us to them. Where is the document? There is no document. It is ours. That's sovereignty. What was that one?
Well, just going on with the sovereignty. So, like, the sovereignty was never ceded by the Aboriginal people or the original people of this country to the white invader, if you will, the British invaders. So, what are the implications of that? How would you explain that, really, basically, to someone on the street? Like, so, if the government's illegitimate, what does that mean for the Aboriginal people of Australia in terms of the law and self-determination?
Well, I'd liken it to someone walking into your house and telling you you're now going to live in the garage. Pretty simple, isn't it?
And yeah, my finishing question, I guess, is how can black people and white people in Australia work together to get a better way?
Well, most certainly not by way of your property law and the institutions of the monarch, who isn't really your monarch, a judiciary that doesn't obey the law, and a media that will print any lie you want to tell them. Instead, you need to come out of that property law into the custodial laws of elders, men's business, women's business, law and initiation, bloodline back to territory, as enunciated on that map. And learn how we do it, and you learn by listening. So all you have to do is listen and you'll be told. Pretty basic, pretty simple. I work on the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And people can treaty in with me. What I do is my treaty is corporations treaty in with me on the basis of, as a sovereign tribal Aborigine person, I get 51% of their corporation and they get 49% if they're going to operate on my country. In terms of individuals, which I've done many with, is that they commit to giving me 10% of their first fruits to have God's will done here. They do that usually by helping out at the embassy, getting some beautiful tent, which makes it very comfortable in this cold, wet weather. It's a godsend. That sort of thing is how I work my treaty. And what I say is that I'm going to keep treating people in on that basis, and that if every blackfella in this country did that, and we had 100 each, I reckon we could take over the country. And go from property law to custodial law, and that is the only hope for the planet. See, blackfella was the last one to get hit. by the colonial devils. And we still got that land, we still got that law. That Chukapa's still there. Whereas Europe's pretty much lost it, because they turned it into those aristocracy estates and used it for sheep instead of people to make money. But they need to get back to this if they're going to save the planet. Without going to a custodial law and coming out of property law, you're not going to realise the oneness in the spirit necessary to save the planet. And Blackfella's got the best example of how to do that with their institutions, elders, men's business, women's business, law and initiation. That's the Chukapa. Bloodlines back to territory, and that's the blueprint. But it doesn't take into account of domain and range, where layered titles come in and you have policemen in, policemen out. And policemen's there to keep the peace and help you, not to enforce any bloody laws. Different thing, blackfella policemen. They peace people. They keep peace.
Can you tell us how we can connect with you on the internet and how we find you on Facebook?
Yes, Sovereign Tribal Aborigine Peoples is the Facebook site. And if you get on that Facebook site and give us your emails, we put stuff up on the Facebook, but it's a bit limited, so we only put up a few pages of a writ, say, when it's about, might be 30 or 40 pages. We can send you the 30 or 40 pages by the email then. And I'm taking actions continuously.
And what kind of assistance are you providing to other people? Are you giving them knowledge about how to deal with court?
Yes, well, a lot of people, especially the, what's that syndrome? The Stockholm syndrome. Those people with the Stockholm syndrome are a bit perplexed about all this. And have difficulties with dealing with it. But what was the question?
Oh, just what assistance are you providing through your organisation?
Yeah, well, telling them how to do it and get on and do it.
So giving people templates for legal work and that
Yes,
kind of stuff.
to do treaties, and I'm setting the benchmark in terms of corporations, 51% sovereign tribal Aborigine peoples, 49% the corporation, whatever it is, be it the colony of Australia or IBM or Rio Tinto or whatever. That's what I advocate. And they must come out of that property law and into our custodial law, or they're going to wreck the planet over fights and wars over their property laws. You go into custodial laws, you don't need war anymore. Can you imagine the budget savings on not having war anymore? We'd have heaven on earth in a minute. And that's what we're on about. Bringing heaven to earth. We kept the garden as God gave it, by our custodial way of law. We're the ones that kept it most faithfully, because we were the last ones to get it. So I'll hold on to more of it. Look, see, you'd be hard to do that in the United States. You'd be hard to do that in England. But it's there in ancient knowledges. It's still there. And we know we got one fellow in Scotland is going back to crofting and trying to get back to the old Scottish ways, yeah, of sustainability. Yeah. Macintosh. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people from a lot of places in remote areas in Australia and overseas are linking in. Sovereign tribal Aborigine peoples is a universal state of being that the devil with his property law has been confusing you about and getting you to go to war about. All wars are the work of the devil since Egyptian times, the Illuminati. There's DVDs we've left here that shows the devil, the family bloodlines that worship him, and how they rule the world. By enslaving you by way of your birth certificate to their statute law.